To both sides. I'm not allowed to go on both sides? You're in a public place.
Yeah.
You're protesting in public.
Exactly what I'm doing.
Why aren't you proud to be representing your cause?
You need to go back on that side.
This is perfect. This is so good.
Back on that side, please.
This is so good.
Back on that side, please.
This is so good. Hey, get your hands off of me. Get your hands off of me.
Yeah.
Go away. You're gonna push me into the road?
Well,
I'm
on the road, so you can
I'm not doing anything here.
You're the one touching me, dude.
Can you?
Hello, Edmonton Police.
Thank
Get
you.
over here. We're gonna come chat with you, okay?
Me?
Yeah, you're gonna chat with you over here.
Okay.
Welcome to the Critical Compass podcast. Today we're going to be diving into some recent protests and the nature of how media distorts the messaging and what these protests are at a ground level. Now, Mike, you had some experience directly on the ground recently at the Million March for Kids protest here in Edmonton. So
Yeah, it was a good time. It was it kind of gave me what I felt like it may have felt like to be in Ottawa last February, January, February, at a much smaller scale. But it was still, I mean, it was. I can't say that I've participated in a lot of protests, but and I wasn't participating per se in this one either. I was just sort of documenting, but.
Well, you didn't have a shirt.
Later that,
you didn't have any identifying. You were just plain clothes with a camera.
Yeah, plain clothes. No flags or signs or any identifying markers of any type. I started off. I parked kind of nearby where the protesters and the counter-protesters were demonstrating, and just a parking lot nearby, and it was about just a 2-3 minute walk. I started off on the protester side, just kind of went in with my camera and my phone, taking pictures with the camera and shooting video with the phone, and spent about maybe 15 minutes there, and then crossed the street to the other side. This protest in Edmonton was taking place outside of the Alberta Teachers Association building, and so the counter-protesters were on the opposite side of the street facing the building. Those are the protesters facing the building. Counter-protesters were on the building side facing the other side of the street. And and then when I went to the other side, I was able to take some video and some pictures in amongst the crowd. It was significantly less. There's significantly less of a counter-protester presence. I would say probably about 3-to-1 protesters to counter-protesters, and there is some drone footage of that Global actually produced that sort of visualizes that a little bit better than maybe my videos can, or maybe you can tell in the videos. But eventually I was I don't know how to say it, outed as having been on one side of the protest documenting, and there were some counter-protesters that didn't want somebody who was ostensibly a neutral party to be on their side of the protest and amongst them, unless you were a supporter. So we'll see some footage of that later, and it was a pretty wild time. I'll queue up a quick video here from the.
I did want to ask you, and for those maybe who aren't familiar, what was this march for, and why was it at this location? Because often you see some of these marches at the legislator grounds or more in a city hall or a public square. Why was it in this intersection? Because this is kind of an odd place to get a whole bunch of people together. So what drew these parents out here?
Yeah, so it's sort of on the kind of on the almost northwest part of the city, actually, maybe about 15 minutes from downtown. So yeah, it was an odd spot. The reason it was there is because this was the 1 million March for Kids, or 1 million March for Children. Both hashtags were trending during the day. And at its essence, if I was trying to be neutral about it, I would say that it was a protest sparked by some members of Canada's Muslim community, and quickly joined in by members of not only other religious groups, Christians for sure, but other concerned parents about what is currently being taught to young children in elementary schools regarding gender identity, sexuality, alternative lifestyle kind of things, if you want to say it that way, and their concerns about it being not age appropriate. And I think that's pretty much the gist of it. And what we'll see later as well is when the mainstream media reported on this to the extent that they did, which wasn't very much, it very quickly became a protest against the LGBTQ community, against trans kids, against trans rights, which is never what it started as. And I don't think most of the people there would describe themselves as people who are particularly against any of these people, more so against the what is perceived as indoctrination of youth right now through the schools.
Yeah, we can easily see, if you do a quick search, or you can see the term an anti-LGBT protest, or a far right, like anti-gay,
lots of far right. Yeah.
So that's kind of the terminology that we saw, and it didn't really line up kind of with the parents there. I think, from my understanding, one of the discussion points was, and this has been happening over the last few months, is should schools be allowed to hide information from parents, especially when it comes to what is being taught about some of these subjects? And then that's where this discussion is kind of now centered around parental rights, and especially on some topics where there's some that don't feel like it's age appropriate, or certain books maybe we shouldn't be shown to kindergartners, or should the focus be on that messaging so early, or at what point should that education start? So yeah, I guess, what if we see some of you've got a good clip of some of the protesters, like, and some of their signs.
Yeah, I've got some couple videos here. First one queued up is there was a speaker that was kind of in the background. I didn't catch all of her speech, but I'll cue this one up. And then the second one is you'll see and hear a little bit of support, more obvious on one side than the other, from people passing by on the street. So something notable from that, the speaker was saying, no matter what our backgrounds are, whatever our religious faith is, and I think you can kind of see that from the faces in the crowd. I mean, I think certain people had a presumption that this was going to be an all, or at least primarily, Muslim protest. And from being there and from seeing that, I would say I think it was fairly representative of the city, to be fair. Like, the city, Edmonton, has a pretty large Muslim community, large Arabic community. But I wouldn't say that they were overrepresented compared to what you might see on demographic percentages of, you know, the general nationality breakdown of Edmonton.
Seems like there's a mix of people, a mix of families. So it's not just a
Lots
bunch
of families, yeah.
single 20-year-olds
Yeah.
at a parental rights
Yeah.
kind of protest.
Yeah, it was lots of families, lots of people of all ages, probably skewing a little bit, well, definitely skewing older than the counter-protester side, but yeah, very representative. I'll show you the second one here where we get some noise from the crowd, so to speak.
So leave our kids alone.
Leave our kids alone. That was there was pretty much one chant the whole time that I was there, at least.
So that's an interesting choice of words, because that's more just a statement of, like, we don't agree with how you're teaching, or like our kids, or how these ideas are being disseminated to kids. And I've heard one example is like, let's say you have a student in kindergarten, and what does it mean to like tell a kid that you're born in the wrong body? Like that's an impressional age, and a statement like that can really confuse somebody. So like, if messages like that are being taught and parents start hearing about it, is it understandable that the parents would not want some of these messages taught?
Yeah, the gravitas of a statement like that is not something that an elementary school kid, maybe even not a junior high or a high school kid of certain maturity level would be able to properly comprehend. So yeah, that was the messaging there. It was there was numerous examples, actually. I don't know that I necessarily caught them on video, but I'm sure other people did, of people saying, like, you know, we're not here to hate on anyone. We're not here to discriminate against anyone. This is purely a message from concerned parents to teachers who we don't agree with the very clearly stated goals of the curriculum in this respect. SOGI, I think, is the acronym: sexual orientation, gender identity. So yeah, it was fairly clear. And then if we want to have a quick view of the other side of the counter-protesters, I've got a couple videos here. First one is just a look at kind of the corner. I was on the protesters sort of corner there, and then this is from the kind of the turning lane meridian, looking at the counter-protesters. So I don't know if you heard that, but when the music kind of cut out there for a second, the chant that I heard a lot of was "Protect Trans Kids." So that I found pretty interesting, that they were that was a pretty common refrain. Very similar to the news articles that we'll look at here in a minute, but yeah, that was it. It seemed like it was a fundamental talking over each other, sort of. The counter-protesters thought that they were there for something that I don't think that they actually were there for.
Yeah, it was not a accurate. They didn't listen to the message, or if they think that, at the most honest reading, you could say that they think that parents are either abusive or would be harmful to trans kids and not let trans kids express themselves. Therefore, they need the schools as a safe haven against abusive parents.
Yeah, it's definitely a defaulting to the assumption that a kid who might be confused about their gender identity would be. It's presumed that the parents are going to be dangerous to them, for sure. So it's an implication that only the schools can step in at that point, or the teachers, or fellow classmates, or counselors, or something like that. Something outside of the family is necessary at the first sign of a child's potential confusion about their gender identity.
That's a good point to highlight, and I think it also, at this time, you'd want to even clarify, like, well, what does it mean to be a trans kid? And the umbrella has become very large. That it does cover gender nonconforming. It's when they ask questions about, well, do you feel more like a boy or a girl? And what do these feelings mean? Or what they're asking is, do you identify more with stereotypes of gender on one side or the other? So in this case, I'm wondering how much under this umbrella is you're almost widening classifications, so the perceived number of people under that classification grows as you like if you include non-binary under that as well. Yeah. Basically, the rejection of stereotypes on other sides. Is that included in is that a trans kid that needs to be protected? Like, what would they define? And if they over classify it, then it's hard to have a conversation when these terms are it's expanding over time. So you're not even discussing the same thing unless you kind of take a step back to ask them, what do they really mean when they say these terms?
Yeah, and what you find, I think, when you ask these people, or when you really take time to think about what it means when they say things like that, what you find is that it's almost more sexist for the people who are saying that, well, we knew that little Timmy was actually a girl because he always liked to play with dolls rather than trucks as a boy, and it's like, well, actually, that's just a stereotype, and that's presuming that there's a right and a wrong way to be a boy and a girl, as if there aren't tomboys, or as if there are not feminine boys. There's so much is a word that they like, fluid, at that age, that these things really don't mean much. And then you find, I can't remember who was saying this, maybe this was on a Peter Boghossian discussion recently, but they're talking about how people who are the type of person who would be a counter-protester at this event speaks in sort of rhetorical games where they say, in the same breath, they'll say things like, if a girl is really into dolls and the color pink and things like stereotypically of girls at that age, they'll say that that's because they were socially conditioned to like those things. But then on the same token, they'll say if it was a boy that was doing those stereotypically or traditionally girl-like things, that's because they had a gendered soul they knew from a young age. So I think it kind of has to be one or the other. It can't it can't be inherent and unchanging and almost like a soul on one end, and then socially conditioned and just a complete construct on the other.
So do you think these people have really thought this out, or do you think they're repeating mantras at a certain point? Or like, are they open to discussion? Like, that's the other question. Do you think coming to a protest, you would want to, if you have a stance and you want to raise awareness for your point, you think you'd engage and articulate your points, share your message, amplify it to try to convince anybody who's there?
Well, I'll show you another clip from the counter-protester side here that might start to answer that question, and might, unfortunately for them, I would say, in this case, sort of confirm some suspicions of what people might think the type of people representative of the demographic of this counter-protest might believe. So that was sort of in the heart of the counter-protester side, and I think that does show pretty clearly. You can see the difference in density of the people there. But yeah, I was kind of thrown for a loop at that, seeing that communist
couple
table.
observations: masks,
yeah,
colored hair,
yeah,
the same kind of signs you'd see at other places, and then that table is a. It's not surprising, but at the same time, there seems to be no aversion from people around that table to being associated with that. You think if that was on the other side, you think people might distance themselves and or like try to give a little bit of space.
Yeah, it's it just, I don't know. It just opens them up to such obvious examples of, that these people are not here in good faith, It was an interesting one. And, well, I guess we can get into it. What I found shortly after I took this video, I had a kind of an interesting experience where I didn't catch this part on video, but the way that the interaction started was the first lady that you'll see in this video. She said to me, "We know what you're doing here." Those were her words. She says, "We know what you're doing here," and I asked her, like, "What am I doing here?" And she didn't really have much of an answer. But what happened was, I had taken a picture of a group of Antifa. So after I saw the communist table and I was sort of making my way through the crowd, there's just a group of maybe just 3 or 4 guys with balaclavas and, the whole helmets and knuckle duster gloves and all that, crazy riot gear stuff, holding the Antifa flag. And I had taken a couple pictures of them, and then that's when they kind of started closing in on me and sort of blocking off my camera. And maybe I'll show the first minute of this here, and we'll see how this goes. To both sides. I'm not allowed to go on both sides? You're in a public place.
Yeah.
You're protesting in public.
Exactly what I'm doing.
Why aren't you proud to be representing your cause?
Sir, can you not take pictures of people's faces? It's just rude.
Well, I can't even see your face.
Cool. That's good.
Hey, don't touch me.
People are asking you not to take pictures of them.
Yeah.
That's really
Then they
rude.
should be out somewhere other than a public place, I suppose.
Alrighty, everybody. Anybody
This
who's
is weird,
leaving
dude.
early,
This is
please
good
come
shit.
this way. We are now leaving with escorted peacekeepers. Woo!
So is this
You
your
need
idea
to go
of
back on that side.
Nobody wants you.
This is perfect. This is so good.
Back on that side, please.
So good.
Back on that side, please.
This is so good. Hey, get your hands off of me. Get your hands off of me.
Yeah.
Go away. You gonna push me into the road?
You're
I'm
on
not.
the road, so you can
I'm not doing anything here.
You're the one touching me, dude.
Can you?
Hello, Edmonton Police.
Thank
Get you over here.
you.
We're gonna come chat with you, okay?
Me?
Yeah, we're gonna chat with you over here.
Okay. So we can maybe we can clip in some more of that later, but yeah, that was my
Yeah,
that was how
that's-
my time on the counter protest side ended.
So, first of all, like, they didn't even want to ask, like, oh, why are you here? Or what do you believe and why? There's no curiosity. The presumption is we're right. Well, first of all, you didn't have a stance, but the fact that you filmed Antifa, I think that's a giveaway, because the only people that want to document Antifa is somebody who's on the other side.
Right.
That is, I think, to them, the fact that Antifa is covered means they are within the movement, they are protecting the movement, and part of that protection is them being aggressive and having their identities covered. So if anything shows their identities, then that compromises the members of Antifa, which are just loosely anybody who just shows up to these things. I know there's different chats or forums that they're on, and they do organize, or they have call to actions that way. There is, I think it's worth noting, maybe I'll bring this up. There's books and resources for Antifa to, like, teaching kind of the tactics and strategies for disruption. The book and website is called it's called Beautiful Trouble. I'm just going to pull it up here because we saw that in action, and this website, it actually makes a better sense. So, well, it sounds pretty good, like, oh, you're empowering individuals to get their voices heard, etc. And but you start looking more into the theories and the tactics. This is where you get things like, well, the real action is your target's reaction, where they're trying to provoke responses, and they have historical
Not
examples.
only the target, the real action is the enemy's reaction. Wow.
Yes.
That's a very particular linguistic choice there.
Well, and part of this principle is that by them going to a protest and being antagonistic, if there's anybody gets shoved back, they have footage of somebody shoving them. And if they're calling protesters fascists or alt-right, or they're violent, or they're hateful, any reaction from them defending themselves can now be used as an example of proof that they are hateful or fascist. So they are almost creating what they want. Because think of this as a theater. This is a public sphere, and they are trying to frame things in a certain way. The whole aspect of them being anti-fascist is because they're rising up to this threat of fascism, which they think is these parents protesting. Like, so the demand for fascism right now is higher than the actual supply of regular, like, these parents are not fascists by any means of the definition.
Yeah.
So there is, even if we go to this tactics page, you could see, like, well, they have the creative disruption, they have culture jamming, they have noise, they have, you start, like, really looking into this, and you're like, well, nothing seems too out of line of what we see at these protests. We see people using umbrellas, using signs. They're trying to, like, block people in. They're trying to surround people. It's a disruption tactic. So
yeah, they very like it's almost like it happened non-verbally, that they all started to kind of coalesce near the edge of the curb there, leaving me no space. My only choice was to back up if I didn't want to push back against them, because, I mean, I knew, like, you could hear my voice saying, like, hey, you know, get your hands off me, right? And to their credit, they didn't, like, no one took a swing at me or anything. Like, no one did anything outrageously violent, but just the action of them kind of moving as a wave, sort of like that, leaving me the only place to go onto the road where there was cars turning. It was very effective.
Yeah, well, it was a mob mentality. They had you surrounded.
Yeah.
They were using signs and other devices to push you instead of using their hands for the most part.
Yeah.
So that's a way of saying, well, I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. It's just my umbrella, or it's just my sign. So they have some buffer there where they're like, well, I never struck him, but it's a form of, it is antagonization in a way. So I think I would bet good money that the people who dress head to toe as Antifa are well versed in some of these theories, and or in their chats and or whatever groups that kind of, I know it's decentralized, but they do kind of emerge. I bet they talk about these things of like, okay, if somebody comes up to you, what do you do? Like, how do you deal with this situation? They've likely discussed a few of these things in beforehand, or you spread this information kind of peer to peer from that way. So these tactics are not hidden; they're out in the open. But it's interesting that this, I would feel that after knowing how they operate, when I see Antifa at defending a certain point of view, I immediately question the validity of a counter protest if they show up. Yeah. It doesn't seem to correlate with a good faith protest.
No, I think it's almost as maybe superficial as it seems. I think it's pretty safe to say in a protest where there are two sides, and one side has families of all shapes and sizes and colors and creeds, very calmly, assembling and gathering together, and the other side has guys in head-to-toe black covering their faces with helmets and knuckle duster gloves on. And
these are 20-year-olds.
Young people,
head to toe,
acting aggressively to people who they view as outsiders. I think it doesn't take a very creative mind to think who the aggressors or the bad guys are on that side. I'm going to queue up here, James, just a short clip of my interaction with a police officer that pulled me aside there.
So he pulled you aside, started asking you questions, and let's see how that.
I'll start it from where I got pulled there, and then we'll see.
Organizer and stuff for this side.
No,
but the plan was, she said, for her group and stuff, was to stay on your guys' side. They're gonna stay on their side.
I'm not on his side. I'm just taking pictures.
Oh, okay, yeah, but you clearly are on the side because you're trying to interject yourself in there. They don't want you there.
How do you mean interject? I'm not doing anything. I wasn't even speaking to them. They were pushing me onto the road.
Yeah, they don't want you to road.
But they don't even know what I represent or what I think.
Which is fine and stuff. The reality is and stuff. You've been seen coming from over there.
Yeah, I started there and I'm ending here.
Okay, so the whole point is, if you're not on anybody's side, we've asked those people and stuff, because there is a bunch of them and stuff that were putting up signs for love and saying it doesn't matter, just love everybody. Cool, go to that side and stuff, so that because we don't want you guys to get, if you're not for anybody, you're just for that type of stuff, we don't want you to get confused with that side or this side, and then there could be an altercation.
So immediately, that was so cheesy to me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Like, this is an Edmonton, a city of Edmonton police officer, just saying as if it's for granted that, well, if you're somebody who they've seen on the other side and you've come to this side, well, we just don't want there to be an altercation, so you should leave. Like, that's like what we were just talking about. You know, if their opinion that if there was a trans child, their family is automatically a danger to them, and this is a police officer saying, well, if you don't believe something that this group of counter-protesters believes, you're in danger, and that's just how it is. Like, is that not creating more division to say that there's no possible way that we can even have a dialogue, that these two groups will be at each other's throats, if not for a line in the sand and dividing them? Yeah, and then I'll scrub a little bit here and find the part where he fundamentally doesn't seem to understand what the term instigation means.
As peaceful as possible.
But
at the end of the day,
you agree, though, that this is, like, regardless of what's happening right now, this is still public property, no?
it's still public property and stuff, but what you choose to do may have consequences, right? If you go into a crowd...
If I choose to take pictures or video of people in public, that can have consequences?
If somebody decides to make a poor choice and do something and whatnot, then yes.
Well, then you're here to protect me, I suppose.
I'm not going to be going with you into the crowd.
That's fine. So I'm going to go back there then.
If you go back there, that's your choice. If something happens and whatnot, you're part of the problem. You would be instigating that problem.
What would I be instigating by taking pictures and videos of people protesting in public?
You're well aware of the fact that they don't want you there, and you're continuing to instigate. It would be no different if you're shouting at them.
But I'm not shouting. I'm not saying anything to them.
I'm not saying that you are. I'm saying it would be no different, right? If you're shouting at them, if you're instigating anything...
But it would be different because they would be the instigators, though.
If you're holding up the phone in somebody's face or whatever, it instigates people. Right? People don't like it.
Well, then they can go.
But that doesn't mean that it's not okay for you to videotape. Or
so you're...
like that.
I'm just trying to get it straight. I'm sorry, I'm not understanding. You're saying that me taking pictures and videos of people protesting in public, obviously with a message to spread, then that would be instigating them, and you can't be responsible for anything that happens to me in that case.
No. So if they make a poor choice and they were to harm you, that is criminal. Sure. That being said, I would prefer not to see that happen. Right?
Likewise.
There's a difference between tripping into a criminal act and then just sitting there and instigating. Instigating isn't criminal. I'm not going to stop you if you want to go into my crowd. It's not criminal. You are allowed to go and do that. But if something happens, you can't look at me and tell me, why didn't you stop this from happening in the first place? I'm telling you, if you go into that crowd and you instigate, something could happen.
Oh yeah, I'm not going to be instigating anything.
And I'm trying.
I just wanted to get that last bit in there because just in case anyone thought that I was trying to be a shithead there. I truly hadn't spoken a word to anybody on that side, and I think that he knew that, but that's a 9-minute video. We'll link to it in the comments, but
so yeah, just to clarify, there's even a difference between to play devil's advocate, like I can see that. So if somebody was purposely going like right up to somebody, phone in the face, and was like constantly like in their personal space with a camera, that would be
not touching you. Yeah.
Yeah. That could be like, I could see that being instigation, and maybe that's what the police officer's thinking in that moment of you going up to people, either like trying to reveal their identities.
Trying to provoke a reaction. Yeah.
Yeah. Versus you were walking through the crowd, capturing the vibes of the crowds. That's a different, and like people just happen to be in the background of the camera. That's a different scenario. You're not singling out individuals, but as they come towards you, obviously you're going to film them because like if they do anything to you, you want it on camera. So,
well, yeah, that, and also, I mean, it was interesting to me that the people who were immediately the first ones to get defensive like that when I had kind of walked through and stumbled across the group of Antifa, those are the people whose identities were entirely hidden. I mean, you couldn't, unless they started talking, which the one guy did, and you could recognize their voice maybe, or, it'd be pretty hard to just recognize somebody by their eyes, but maybe by their eyes and their voice they could. I mean, it was those were the people who were upset with me, just being there and documenting it. You can see on our Twitter too, if you guys look, on our X account. I took tons of pictures too of both sides, and I literally did not hear a single word from anyone on the protester side. I took tons of pictures of people. I tried not to take pictures of kids. I did take one picture that was kind of cool of a kid on his dad's shoulders. He had a phone. The phone was just about as big as he was. He was holding in front of his face, so you couldn't identify him. But didn't hear a single word. I asked people too if it was, you know, if they were holding a sign really prominently. I just said, you know, like, hey, I really like your sign, and I didn't really ask, but I just sort of implied that I was, you know, being respectful of their space. But yeah, it was a really wild reaction I did not expect to have. So yeah, if you guys want to watch the full, just about 9-minute interaction, it's on our YouTube. We'll link to it.
Yeah, we can. It's worth watching these things kind of in more depth, but it's nice covering the kind of these highlights. That is a remarkable difference between the sides of the protesters. Did you see anybody on the protesting side shutting down discussion or like preventing anybody from being out the side? Did anybody cross over? Was there any?
No, there was no. Didn't feel any aggression. Didn't see any. Any signs of discontent or anything. I mean, there was obviously parents who were very passionately saying their slogans or whatever, but no, it was totally different vibes. The counter-protester side got pretty riled up when you could see in that other video where the guy was driving by with his truck that had the emojis on it. But yeah, for the most part, it was the protester side was it felt pretty welcoming and very the vibe on it was good. I don't think anyone would have a problem. Like, I moved through the crowd pretty easily. Everyone was, hey, excuse me, yeah, no worries, and people moved, and there was no shoving or anything like that. The counter-protester side, when I managed to go in the first time, and I got some of that video and like of the communist table and stuff, didn't really get much pushback either. It was only when I started taking pictures of just groups and you guys can see from the pictures I wasn't up in people's faces or anything. It was the exact same style of photograph on one side versus the other. That's only then was when it kind of got a little bit out of hand there. So, but no harm, no foul. It was fine. Like you'll see at the end of the video when I was talking to the police officer, that I just thanked him for his time and walked away. I didn't end up going back.
Still interesting that he wouldn't call out aggressive behavior from those people who are obviously, they were grouping up on you and they were pushing you, and so that was still surprising. But it's not the first time maybe we cover that in a future of other examples of maybe the police not policing equally between different groups on different protests,
treating one side with kid gloves, maybe.
Yeah, so that's worth covering. Maybe we bring that up in the future. I did want to cover. This is where it's kind of interesting. Some of the messaging behind it. We've got a few minutes here, but I want to show you the Canadian Union of Public Employees. So that would represent teachers, and the CEPE urges members to resist anti-trans hate. They say right-wing groups across the country are organizing rallies this Wednesday, September 20th, attacking trans youth and spreading disinformation about 2SL LGBTQI plus people. And it's a growing part and organized hate movement in Canada. So that's a stand from the union. Mm-hmm. And that's a very specific, very specific language, very specific message. And they even have that logo of the no space for hate. And I keep on seeing that all over socials. People have replaced their banners or profile pictures with that. What I've noticed is as soon as you get a few either organizations, media, and or government officials using that either image or that language, people that are a little bit less engaged just read this quick and I'm like, well, it's a professional organization. Of course they know better. And they don't even look further. And they just assume that the protest or the march was an anti-trans hate march.
Yeah. 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 If you were just reading this, I mean, there would be unless you knew to look for secondary sources, or if you knew somebody who was on the protester side, I mean, you could be forgiven for thinking that, well, obviously, I mean, this is a professional union that ostensibly represents the feelings of its members. And if they've all come to this conclusion, then yeah, I mean, that seems pretty cut and dry. But yeah, I think you've got a few other links that kind of have a similar sentiment, which is just it couldn't be further from my experience of it, and the experience that I documented of it, particularly this notion of the right-wing groups. I don't know if you guys know this, but the Arab and the Muslim community, at least in Edmonton and Alberta that I'm familiar with, are not traditionally conservative voters. Most of my family, anyway, I'm part Lebanese, and historically, almost all of my family have been liberal voters, and I think you'll find a lot of historical liberal voters on the Arab and Muslim in those communities, because for better or worse, I mean, those were the people that pushed and kind of allowed them to emigrate here. So they're fairly loyal in their voting habits like that, and there was no correlation that I could see between any outward, very obvious signs of what you would expect a right-wing group or a right-wing voter or somebody that's portrayed as very far right. In fact, there's a picture on our X account of a guy holding up a sign that very explicitly said, his only sign that day said, "Not far right." That was his message. So, I mean, it's the messaging was very unified from these unions and the corporate press that reported on this, and it just was not reflective of the reality that I saw.
Well, I have heard, tongue-in-cheek, that due to low membership, white supremacy groups have opened up membership to people of all ethnic groups to boost their numbers.
That's very inclusive of them. That's nice.
They're now more multicultural than ever.
Yeah,
I did want to show you, I did a quick search on CBC.ca for the 1 million March for Kids. And the only link was why people protested LGBTQ plus education in schools. And you click on that, and it's actually a CBC Kids document. And I think my feeling on this,
their points, hey?
Well, here's the thing is share to Google Classroom. So I think part of this is almost queuing up for teachers and or parents. That's right. The kind of focus on it. It starts out and you're like, well, okay, well, everything from sex education to preferred pronouns, or you're talking about those policies. The one thing I noticed on here is okay, well, you start reading, and then it's well, what's this link? Here's what the 2SL GBTQ+ stands for. Okay, they've got that link. What protesters say? Okay, well, it's kind of giving some context, and then you scroll down, more explanations on pronouns. This whole page, every link is supporting the gender ideology, talking points, and exploring more. And maybe this is worth exploring in the future of well, what are they covering? How are they talking about it? But this seemingly, if this was an unbiased thing, they just wouldn't be peppering it with basically an approved way of thinking with all these other
Mhm.
links through there as well. While
Very
eventually,
directed
like,
language.
yeah, they give a little bit of context, and then you can see by the quotes here, well, it's not safe for kids to talk to their parents. It's etc. And like you fall into these very similar lines of thinking that we brought up kind of at the beginning as well. So I just found that interesting. The only link on CBC, I think there was maybe some local ones, but you think it would show up in their search on their main site if they had more coverage.
Yeah.
So either they're not
Yeah.
covering things, or when they are, maybe they're not giving the full story. It's got a ideological slant to it from the start.
Interesting.
There was one good one though. The Global News, they seem to have a relatively balanced description of what was going on in
Yeah,
Lethbridge,
yeah.
but that was these are more one-offs. It's not these. It's just whoever was writing that from Lethbridge. Maybe it was
Yeah,
like
it's
a little
again, it's
bit
a more local paper,
a little
right?
bit more balanced that way. So, but yeah, all in all, I think these kind of protests are. I think we really need individuals just to, well, first of all, anything you read, question everything, look a little bit deeper than the surface. Try to really understand what's going on. Watch live streams. Try to watch like footage on the ground. If you are on the ground, talk to people, ask what they believe and why, and just do a little bit of listening, because I think some of these things are we're not given a full picture, and the media and these representations don't do it justice.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that it's become so clear in the last, I would say probably 2 years for sure, but probably 3 by argument's sake, and maybe even longer than that for people who were paying a little bit more attention than I was, prior to 2020. It's become pretty clear that most of what we have come to know as our kind of our benchmark media corporations in Canada all share a fairly similar message and all sort of issue messaging in a very similar way at a similar time, and all appear to reach similar conclusions. And as we know, of course, reality isn't like that. There are always at least 2 sides to a story, and anyone who tells you that it's obviously this is the case, or obviously this is the case, or if you believe this, you're a far right fascist, and if you believe that, you're a far left communist. There's almost always more nuance to it than that. And if you're being presented by your country's media, if you're being presented only seemingly sources that lead you to one direction or another very consistently, well, then you got to find new sources. That's part of our goal here at the Critical Compass, is to pull from a wide variety of sources, thinkers. We'll link to tweets. We'll have a Substack where we post all of our sources, all of the articles that we use, all the videos that we take can be found on our socials as well, our X account. And we'll try and provide as comprehensive of a picture as possible of social issues that are affecting us right now.
Well, it's
How about that,
perfectly
James?
said, and I think that's a perfect place to wrap up. There's definitely more to explore, because we can contrast other protests, and we can even look at the convoy and some of the messaging around that. But those are worth. There's a lot of nuance to cover, and that's going to take a whole other podcast for that. So we'll circle back to that and go from there.
Sounds good. Thanks, James.
But,
Appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks for your time.
Cheers.
Cheers.